So today we're talking about measurement because let's paint a picture here, right? Let's paint this picture. We are now in a post-cookie, post-ID world. What I mean by that is Apple has decided that it's a privacy-first company, right? It's built its entire marketing around privacy. If you've seen the ads during the World Cup about that little gimp that's following you around the place, they're using that as a tool to sell more phones, right? Tim Cook has decided to declare war on the cookie and ID, right? The cookie is no longer usable across the Apple Safari ecosystem. And Google has decided that they're going to get rid of the cookie, although they're not really sure how they're going to do it because it makes them so much effing money. So they're going to try and come up with some flock or some other nonsense to keep the show going on the road. Suffice to say, this industry is at a crossroads in terms of what they do right now. And this panel is all about that very, very subject, because if we do contextual, if we use IDs, if we use everything, how do we measure the success of it, right? So I'm joined here by our panel, and I'm going to name them out here. I don't think they need to introduce themselves, right? We've got Alex from Skyrise Intelligence, we've got Lara from ITV, Barbara from Essence, Lavinia from MNC Statue Performance, and Ross Nickel from Zephyr. Welcome. So I want to kick this question off to Lara first. I want to talk to you about what happens now, right? We are in this new world, right? So from your perspective, how does the industry move forward in this new ecosystem? Because this is literally the biggest topic we have to deal with right now. Measurement is, if we can't measure it, what's the point? So let's start with you, Lara.
Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to get used to this echo.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? But we'll battle through.
That, and I'm not sure whether to wave or not, because when we used to do these things virtually, we always used to sort of wave at people.
Yes.
I think that's not done.
No, we don't wave at people anymore. You can wave at people if you want.
Right. Gosh, it's really weird. It's like hearing myself think. So let me just step back, I guess. So from a broadcaster point of view, from a television point of view, television is often, it's often said that, it's the last frontier. It's the, we are so the last kind of media channel to kind of catch up with the digital transformation, et cetera, et cetera. What we find now actually is really interesting, because we're in a position where we can kind of leapfrog and some of the technological challenges that we're seeing today. So for example, cookies has never really been a problem for us. I mean, at ITV, for example, 70% of our viewing is on TV screens, and there's never been cookies. And so, in a way, we have always tried to develop advertising solutions and other database solutions that don't rely on cookies. So that's a good position to be in a way. So we've sort of leapfrogged that whole cookie phase, shall we call it a phase, and we're going to, how do we use our first-party data? How do we use the identifiers that we collect in a logged-in environment to kind of create solutions that are privacy by design, security by design from the start? But to answer your question, Kieran, I think it's ludicrous to even think about building products without understanding whether they work or not. So I don't think it's we're moving from a targeting first world to a measurement first world. I think those two pieces have always been there, but they've kind of been disconnected. So if you're a product creator, you worry about the product, which is a targeting product or whatever it might be, a bunch of dashboards. And then we sort of outsource the measurement of how it works somewhere else. But with us now looking at kind of how do we create new connectors, I think everybody in this ecosystem is taking responsibility, not just for the creation of the product, but actually they need to be able to understand how it works. Very product-first mentality, test it, measure it, is it really working? Is it delivering the outcomes that we need from an advertiser perspective, et cetera? If it's not, go back, make it better. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Vinny, you work at the coal face, right? Execution all the time. And we had an interesting conversation, myself and Lydia, that the industry will adapt to the new war, right? And you do a lot of buying across iOS, and I'm curious to understand how you as an agency is kind of evolving to this new reality. Because, like, if you remove the ID, then a lot of the media you have is kind of ineffective theoretically, but you think that the industry can adapt around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really where agencies are going to show their value, because with these challenges for clients, it gives us more of an opportunity to present ourselves as a client partner and give better recommendations. I think, with the update on iOS, that's obviously been a huge impact on our industry, and we are adapting and continue to adapt to that. But I think, as with everything that happens in a fast-paced industry where tech is constantly evolving, we should be used to, or at least be comfortable with change and adapting to the way that the industry moves. Otherwise, you're just going to get left behind.
Yeah. Alex, you're shaking your head there. Well, nodding in agreement.
In agreement.
It was more like a round gesture.
I wasn't disagreeing. So hi. Regardless of where we're going forward, and I appreciate things are going to change in terms of availability of data, but the question that I would actually ask is, why are we using measurement? And for me, I think I see two broad areas. I think the first is that there's, if you think around, sort of say, direct measurement of particular technology, I'm spending X, I'm getting X back. That I understand, quite siloed kind of measurement. But a lot of what measurement is about is, you might say it's as much for posturing. And by posturing, I'm talking about, job's done, we've done it, how do we do? So it might be a technology stack, we're better. It might be an agency, we've improved. And what I sort of disagree to an extent with that is that when we sort of think about how we use this stuff, it kind of goes plan, activate, measure. Measures an end point. And that's where I disagree, because for me, good quality measurement is actually perhaps the beginning of that cycle as opposed to a linear process. I want good measurement, and that might, forget the posturing, that might be weaknesses in performance. Weaknesses are opportunities. Good measurement informs good planning, which leads to quality activation, which then in turn goes back to measurement. I think it's a cycle, and if we think a bit more like that, I think that's where measurement has got more of a role to play.
Barbara, you were shaking your head, or I see nodding your head in agreement there. Obviously, we need people a few shaking their heads because we need a disagreement. But you agree with that? Because I think it's interesting, because we had conversations as well that your thinking is around this new age of customized attribution, right? We're going to have all these different signals, right? Whether it's contextual or sort of like a scale ID or whatever. So it's kind of coming back to the agency to kind of add value in terms of that customized attribution piece.
Absolutely. So definitely nodding in agreement with everything that has been said. Like, measurement needs to be upfront. This is not something that we end up doing and the job is done once we know that ROI is X and everyone is happy or not happy depending on the results. I think it's much more around, and also to your point, as having the added value from the agency in this fragmented world, having the ability to understand the ecosystem. We have different partners, all with different availability of data, different availability of whether or not they are integrated. So having the ability to leverage the different data sources and make sense of them is something that the agency can definitely help. We've started looking at integration with different data sources, and making sure that we have a wide array of data sources is something that is going to be helping. So we've spoken about behavioral data, contextual data. There is a lot more that we want to be able to do with attention metrics as well, which is something that ultimately does not belong to the cookie world. It's something that we do want to get into, and that will help the industry in understanding above and beyond the cookie what performance is.
Yeah, we'll come back to that next gen measurement piece, but come back to you, Rassi. You're obviously working a lot with a lot more UGC sort of type content, and you made the point about the standardization that is going to be a necessary thing going forward, particularly with all these different platforms that you are working with, like the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the Snaps, the TikToks of the world, where it's not just quality content as a la ITV, but let's be honest, pretty long-tail crap. Let's say in many ways, not necessarily all crap, but some crap. And good videos and stuff. But you're talking about standardization as potentially being a way to kind of work with that, and industry-wide standardization in terms of like that measurement piece?
Yeah, exactly. Standardization is going to be extremely important, but actually defining measurement is going to be really important as well, because everyone's got a different opinion on what we're measuring. So are we talking about safety? Are we talking about viewability? Are we talking about suitability, which we're getting into more at the moment? And agreeing with what Alex was saying about it's not just siloed. It's not just, well, let's look at my measurement. What does my measurement tell me? Because the measurement should be able to inform decisions around the targeting side. Well, from a Zephyr's perspective, we believe it's all interconnected. Whether you're talking pre-bid or post-bid, it's all about understanding the content, whether it's in walled gardens, whether it's in the open web. It's about understanding, is the content appropriate? And that could be whether it's valid or not, whether it's safe or not, whether it's suitable or not. It's all about understanding it, that everyone needs to understand it. And we're at this really messy stage at the moment when it comes to measurement, because everyone's using different metrics.
But we were sort of almost dependent, like apart from the TV world, we were almost depending on this proxy that really was just knitted together by the industry just to make things work. Like it was a hodgepodge of, of tech. Like JavaScript wasn't supposed to be used as a measurement proxy. Let's be honest. And the view-through window is a load of nonsense at the best time. It's almost like a religious. It's almost like a religion. You've got to believe in it, like to make it work. Like there's no real science behind it. So that's interesting that you talk about that. That we are at a point where we're actually looking at this subject again. To Alex's point as well, is that we're rethinking that measurement.
Yeah, to kind of jump in there, rethinking the measurement. Now, obviously we're in the UK now, but I'm going to talk about something called GARM, which is the Global Alliance of Responsible Media. Some people will know, some people won't know. It's part of the World Federation of Advertisers. And essentially what they're trying to do is make standardized measurement when it comes to safety and suitability. Now, the big platforms have all started adopting it. TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, love them or hate them, right? They're all starting to adhere to these standardizations. And all the big agency groups now have all opted in. There's about 120 organizations that are all saying, yes, we're going to start working to the GARM standards. Now, that should make, in theory, everyone's lives a lot easier if we're all measuring using the same standards and the same open source framework, which any technology can adopt that framework and then apply it to their targeting or to their measurement.
Laura, you have a opposing view in that, because you said to me in a conversation a couple of weeks ago that there will be no ID nirvana, all right? There is no ID to rule them all, despite what the Googles and whoever else in the world are doing. I think you still believe that's the case, that these IDs are not particularly scalable.
I think I'm very much supportive of standardization, especially as the way you put it, open source standardization. This is not a black box. Everyone can see it, and you can sign up to it. What I worry is when in conferences like these, there's inevitably frustration whenever we talk about measurement. There's this feeling like it's holding us back. Why is it holding us back?
But it's not.
Right?
But it's not.
No,
Fragmentation is our friend. Everybody
I think so.
Everybody in this crowd is benefiting from the breakup of this industry, right? The only two companies that benefit from standardization are Google and that crap company called Meta.
I'm going to. Is that the third time that Meta has been said today? Someone keeping track?
I can't stand looking at Mark Zuckerberg. I want to punch his face in.
I think what I want to separate is standardization from unification. This concept of we can't do anything until we come up with a unified way to measure everything, because otherwise, how can we possibly tell how everything is doing? And this is the bit that I challenge. I don't think we should be looking for a unified measurement nirvana. I support standardization across a portfolio of measurement options that as a marketeer, as an agency, you should be able to, that will be your toolkit for how you plan, activate, and measure your campaigns, depending on the outcomes, for the brands that you work for. This concept of a unified measure,
No, I agree, there's always going to be nuance, right? We can all talk about an open source framework that in theory should work in platforms, in the open web as well, but you're also going to have the nuance, like you say, the challenges with CTV, the challenges within app environments, the challenges within UGC. We're going to have to work with those individually, and that's the hard part. And I hate using the term chicken and egg, but it is very much chicken and egg. We need more adoption of these standards and more creation of it for it to effectively work.
I think just the unification piece to your point is the reason why it worries me is we've seen this before.
Oh yeah.
And you know, for a while we were caught in this sort of the click-through rate phenomenon for a lot longer than I think we should have been. And I worry that going into TV, we're looking for something like that. What is the one metric that will miraculously unify how we buy video across all platforms?
Alex, this
doesn't exist.
I'll come to you, Alex, because obviously this is where the opportunity for new types of measurement emerge, right? So, you know, you're working sort of in geo and that kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I want to talk about the progressiveness of this, because this is a real opportunity for everybody in the panel to kind of like reimagine it, because I'll come to the agencies in a minute, because I think their futures are set in stone in terms of quality, because they've got the huge opportunity. But I want to talk about, Alex, because you're working in that space, talk about these new areas that are going to pop up in terms of being able to do the type of measurement that you were talking previously about.
Yeah, I mean, again, I kind of refer back to the point around, you know, what were we trying to do? Because we talk about standardization. I mean, you know, I don't think there is obviously a singular truth out there in measurement. I don't think anyone's claiming there is. And you know, if we think about all the different types of, you know, media and what we're trying to achieve, I mean, you know, to give you an example, I mean, at Skyrise, what we do is we work with telco data. So it's the data that flows through a mobile network. Just to quickly paraphrase, think like crime data. You get statistics around crime, but you don't see the data of the crimes. It's a bit like that. It's all anonymized. But what it gives is it gives a measurement opportunity where we see a third of the population, and it's a continuous data set, so it's coming in, day out. Now, the point that I'm trying to make there is, well, then you say, well, okay, we've got that, what are we trying to measure? And where we, you know, and again, I'm back to this point around what are we trying to do, something I'm not a great fan of, for example, would be attribution. So let's talk location. If you were thinking, well, out of home, we can provide measurement, people who walk past a particular space. If you're thinking around a brand reinforcement campaign, brand awareness, I mean, to actually try and attribute that back on some level, it's a bit of a shove. But I would say that, you see, I mean, the measurement should be about effectiveness, ultimately. And effectiveness is measured, you might say, by revenue. But that's a false measure if you think around seasonality, macroeconomic factors. I mean, you know, in COVID, for example, year-on-year growth is not it. Where we create opportunities is not so much about saying, well, we've got the app and the geo data. We've actually got a view across the market. So the type of products that we do, and we're not a measurement company, by the way, we kind of give it away as part of what we do for our data sets. We will look at a brand, let's say, web traffic, as a good proxy for share of wallet and engagement, and we will compare a brand to its competitors. So where you are growing and your competitors are growing, or where you're not growing at the same rate, that for me is the opportunity that we see in our data, which is something of a truth that says, how are you performing against your competitors? And we take that as a starting point, not measurement for the sake of measurement itself.
I think this is a very important point that you're making, like in between having an understanding of macro and micro measurements, that there is not like one singular measurement piece that will solve it all. Like there is a balance to be obtained in between having a good understanding of, for instance, if we think of attribution or incrementality measurement, and all of the other factors that could contribute to that understanding of the media performance. Like we shouldn't be siloed to, for instance, like more often than not, a single individual channel measurement, and then it's pretty hard.
Do you think that's the trap we fell into over the last 10 years? That we've bought into this idea that the cookie is sort of the way for us to measure everything, and this is the way we did it. And actually, this explosion, if you will, in the space is actually making us rethink that process. And just that's actually something you guys are looking at internally, going, okay, how do we kind of take all those data points? And to your point, like every channel is completely different. You can't have a standardized way of measuring across all channels. They all contribute to an ultimate goal, which is basically selling more stuff.
Absolutely. I was just about to say, like, this is also as important in the fact that every channel has its nuances, like has its signals that matter most than others. So on TV, we would have a series of signals that matter quite importantly that would definitely not be applicable to OTT, for instance. And this we need to be taking into account.
But isn't that what the big tech companies are trying to do, is tell us that we need to have one source of truth? If any of you, I mean, you know, is that the case of we this is an opportunity for you to kind of rework it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're obviously focusing on media measurement here, but I think what we all just need to do is take a step back and, like, from our perspective, is speaking to clients about their first-party data. Forget, like, actually understanding what success is on their side. I think that moving the beast of measurement is difficult, whether it's a startup or a huge business, because either it's really difficult to change a big business's way of looking at measurement, or if they're in infancy, they're really struggling to even understand where to begin. I think, you know, when it's looking at unification and what all these partners are trying to sell to us, it's kind of like we can focus on that, but really it's actually simplifying it even further and just looking at what success is for a client before even just jumping into like media metrics as well.
And on that media metrics, actually, to both of your previous points, and actually I think there lies the trap, and I can give you an example of it. So Larry mentioned click-through rates and CTRs. Okay, CTRs are not a singular source of truth. Of course they're not. They don't claim to be, and they are valid and they're important. However, I mean, we had an example, in fact, a couple of times, but there's an example where we have, we're trying to sort of sell our data in for activation to improve performance. And we've had an agency representing the client sort of essentially saying, I'm not sure it will quite work for us because it will disrupt the CTR rate. Now you might say, well, that's kind of your problem, Skyrise. Well, no, that's the tail wagging the dog, in that the whole strategy has now become defined by we're hooked on CTR, we need that line to keep going up. So the behaviors and the strategy is now fitting in to fit a metric, and that's the trap of it.
It's really hard to change.
It's ingrained. Most of the marketers get bonused on CTRs. So we've literally grown this sort of like economy around clicks, which is bloody insane. I mean, look, you think you have to have outcomes-based media somewhere. Like, that's probably why the Amazon, Googles, and Facebook are making money. But we, as an industry, can move more nuanced. Like, it doesn't work that way.
The thing that's difficult about where we are now is that obviously the industry is changing and measurement is changing, and it will continue doing so. It's really hard to get people to be the person on a client side to be like, I'm going to be the first one that does it. My year on year, we're going to forget about that. I'll be the one that puts my neck on the line with my boss, whoever it may be, and say, okay, well, this is where we start again. And so that's actually what's so difficult about this ever-changing measurement piece, is that you're trying to get people to buy into the fact that you're just going to have to look at the numbers differently, even if they look worse.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I don't think we're going to change overnight. Some of the things that we are looking at ITV from a kind of ad product development perspective is how do we start to kind of bring different methodologies together in one product, to bring different narratives, measurement narratives together in one product, so that we can start to, sort of shed some light on the fact that there are multiple ways to measure the success of what you do with us on ITV.
Because you talked about let's come back to Ross's point, right? Measuring different sort of metrics like view build, etc. But you talk about the creative is often ignored as part of the process. It's exactly almost like we have to have the execution, like it's like a text-based ad on Google or some other sort of walled garden.
And that's a perfect example. So one of the products that we launched earlier this year is called Data Match, and using the clean room technologies that are available today, the bunker technologies that are available today, we're able to bring data sets together in a secure way. And it's so right what you've said, Lavinia, about having a conversation with advertisers about first-party data. And you have that conversation, you create a product. The agency or the advertiser initially will be thinking about how to bring data sets together for targeting. And yes, we can do that with this technology. But what we're doing is delivering not just the targeting option, but delivering the measurement and the insight that you can get from those data sets being combined as part of a standard offering of that particular product. And that's, I think, how you start changing perceptions. I think,
how do brands react to that? Like, I'm curious, is when you introduce all of these things, whether it's Garma, or whether it's new measurement piece or creative, how does a brand react to that? Are they receptive to that, or are they so processed in the way that they think about how campaigns should be run? And let's be honest, they've been brainwashed and all the rest of it by training from large vendors and all the rest of it over the years that is it difficult to get out of that mindset? And that's where, like, ultimately that's where you guys are, the money's flowing from the marketer, right? Whether it's through the agency or through, middlemen tech vendors or to the publisher itself. That mindset is hard to change.
It is.
And
The agencies want to jump in there, or Ross even.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to change. When we think about working with brands, working with agencies, they are set in their ways. For video, because that's where we specialize, we're not thinking about the clicks, but more the views. What is the view-through rate? Like, how effective is it just watching a video? And that is a redundant metric, especially when you think about YouTube, right? The amount of kids' content that's on there, I know I've got kids myself, I've realised how much is on there. And do you know what? They don't skip. They don't skip any ads at all. Mine don't know how to do it anyway.
You know how to.
So on a spreadsheet, right? So on a spreadsheet, it looks like it performed really well. That ad performed really well. It got viewed all the way to the end. But how effective was that, really?
That's an interesting point because we have the same issue with custom content, right? And here again, like to your point, like marketers or rather advertisers are pretty focused on the bottom line. And if you want to do brand awareness, or if you want to do change the perception, and you have an amazing program and you want to have very creative ads that are going to emotionally touch your audience, then it's hard to measure. Like we've had this challenge.
So that's the catch-22, is that, like, the more custom stuff you do and the more you go up the funnel, it just gets harder and harder to measure.
Right, and this is where I think agencies like Essence can help in the sense that we do have a series of options on the table to, again, like I'm bringing back attention metrics and have the ability to leverage other measurement solutions that are not traditional, like that are not causal, that are not cookie-based. And this is something that ultimately does not tie back to a bottom line, but yet again, that actually tells you how effective your marketing is, and it's far away from having that revenue figure.
Does that play in the strengths of the agencies? I'm just thinking about this again, right? If you think about the agencies are sort of the relationship with the marketer, does that put you in a strong position going forward? Because you're able to go to them and say, look, the world has completely changed. We have to rethink how we do this stuff. We can't rely on IDs because they're not scalable. We can't rely on cookies because everybody's either blocking them, or we could get arrested by the data police, or some lunatic might sue me for $1 billion or $8 billion, or what was it? Amazon was sold for it was $8 billion, whatever. So there's that opportunity for you as an agency and even publishers to kind of go and reimagine that with your clients.
okay,
Absolutely. And it does take some convincing. And this is where I think that...
I want to be in one of those meetings.
I think this is all about, again, like being innovative and having the ability to tie this back to some kind of metrics that is talking to them. So having a lot of experimentation with new measurement solutions is definitely helpful.
Yeah, and that brings... Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's part of, I'm not talking obviously specifically about Essence, but there's two things. It's like the role of the agency, and there's a lot of variability in there. But, there's not a lot of difference, again, to this point, between measurement and research, insight, and activation. It's all one and the same if we're talking about it. And, you could ask the question, is it the role of agency just to measure the performance in the back end, but the strategy that goes behind it, which links into planning? I mean, again, if you're running media strategy as an agency on behalf of a client, and I'm not going to name names, but it's coming off persona-based data that's based around census and things like that. I think we all know the kind of data we're talking about, or small panel. Again, they have their own strengths there. That in itself is still measurement data. It's seen as being slightly different. You're taking a measure of the market. You're taking a measure of the opportunity. And although we say measurement's everything, I think it's something that isn't really taken to the maximum with an agency. I think there's an element of it, and it's an area that could be improved through better performance measurement.
It's funny, we sat at a panel 3 years ago, right? And I was interviewing probably one of the greatest minds in ad tech, which is Dr. Boris from IPONWeb. He's a fucking genius, right? So let's put it that way. He's built ad servers, and he's built basically modern ad tech infrastructure. And Boris is a very sensible, practical man. And I said to Boris, what happens when the cookie goes away? This is when all this was starting. He says, we'll just go back to panel-based solutions. So that's what I was going to talk about next. It's a nice segue, I have to say. That was pretty good. What a pro. It's just talking about panel-based solutions then. Is that sort of a viable option going forward? Like, I'm not talking about the Barb stuff, I'm talking about next-gen panel-based stuff. I mean, ITV's in a good position to do this, but let's talk a bit about that, Laura.
I think that's absolutely right. I think, you know, a mixed methodology approach is exactly what we need to kind of develop a more sophisticated set of tools, a more nuanced set of tools. We are already doing some of that work in pilot in my team, so you know, relying on ITV's own ID infrastructure, our 35 million registered user base.
35 million?
Yeah, apparently, last count. And then using that ID as a way to connect with other data sets and other tools like surveys and panels, so that we can start to, both ways actually, so we can start to bring new, interesting, first-party survey and panel data and map that across into, our addressable audience data set. But then also the other way, so off the back of a campaign running, we can do mixed methodology in terms of measurement of performance, campaign performance. So not only can we sort of match the ID of a user was exposed to a campaign to potentially what they did on the advertiser's website, but we can also run surveys that we can link back with the ID to the exposure data, so we can also then bring in other measures that are not just transactional or digitally based. It's just about, I mean, what I say is, you can't expect to have sort of one answer to every question here. I think there is we're in a fantastic position right now because there are tools available to test and learn in this space. Yeah. And, absolutely love working with agencies and advertisers directly on kind of, pushing the boundaries with us as well, and kind of discussing how can we bring these data sets together so that we can start to create something new and sophisticated around this
There's
space.
probably a few programmatic people just throwing up at the minute when I mentioned panels, what the hell is that all about? I'm going to get punched later on because I actually brought this up. But Lavinia, do you get a lot of people throwing up when you talk about panel-based measurement at the MNC Saatchi?
Yeah, but to be honest, we don't really talk about it an awful lot because it's just,
It's like the embarrassing uncle who comes to your weddings,
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that it's something that we're really focusing on, but I do agree in the point it has to be mixed. I also think, we're talking about some really advanced concepts here. I think it's always, you need to remember there's a scale as well on the type of business that you are and what you're trying to achieve. And I think to try and achieve perfection is obviously a great thing to strive to, but it shouldn't slow you down, right? There are some basics that you can do. There are some simple things you can do, simple testing. We don't have to overcomplicate this conversation endlessly, because it can actually slow down some businesses when you're trying to aim for that really advanced process. So I think it's very much support the idea of testing. I also think there are opportunities to keep it simple as well.
I think, if I could just say, around the point around panels, I mean, I'm not going to defend them or attack them, I couldn't care less, but
a lot of people get aggressive, Alex, about panels. I mean, I have had nearly fist fight over Barb, mostly because I was fighting the Barb person.
I'll watch myself on the way out. But, the thing about, you've got panel. I mean, okay, so panel is going to be good to express things like sentiment and so forth. But the other side of it, which I think is a lot closer to measurement, is actually behaviors. I mean, so for example, we do our data is quite good because it's got a lot of web transactions and apps. So, I mean, betting and gambling is one of those sectors where it's used fairly extensively. And behaviors, in terms of what we do this, is like we can actually start to build things like sub-segmentation. So you have actively engaged, highly engaged, frequency, recency, all these types of things. These are also things that you might attribute maybe to measurement, but at the same time, they're about behaviors. It's how do I do it? And these are also elements that if you've got the right type of data, you can start to bring these in as new measurement points, both on the back end and again, to think about taking it down to a lower level in terms of your strategy and your activation.
Well, Ross, is this a level of sophistication the industry has to get to? I know this stuff, it's easy to have standard, right? But you kind of have to ingest all these different channels, all these different silos. I know the agencies have been building econometric modeling for a long, long time, and there is a lot of science behind it. But it feels like we've gone up a level. Like maybe we got a bit lazy for 10 years and said, all right, we're back at, but it feels like the sophistication levels. Well, how do you feel like the industry has to adapt to this?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because when we talk about panels, we think about the old school, TV metrics, but actually it's a really effective way for making new technologies evolve when it comes to measurement. So when we think about measurement at Zephyr, we think about the walled gardens and video specifically, right? And video is actually really hard to measure because it's super subjective and it's super nuanced. Now, if you actually apply the kind of legacy tools for the open web, which is like semantics and keywords, that helps you understand what a page is about or what a piece of content is about. Apply that to a video, it doesn't work because there's a lack of metadata surrounding the videos. The tags and everything evolved around videos don't often correlate to the content as well. So we actually use panels and we crowdsource it. We have millions of reviews done by real people that helps inform machine learnings to truly understand the risk level, the content, the safety and the suitability of individual videos. So we think about it in a different way when it comes to panels.
So what you're saying is that there's still the element of human application involved in this. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the customized approach is definitely going to be the way we go in the industry. And there is a fear, though, among this audience is that we are abandoning a way to compete with the walled gardens. I just want to go through the panel quickly because we've got 5 minutes left, but I want to talk about that quickly. But do you feel that we're just leaving money on the table? Like, so the idea is, well, the addressability piece is going, you're just giving more money to the Facebooks, Googles, and the Amazons of the world who can add sort of addressability and accountability for the spend. Lara, do you think that's the case? Or are we sort of like oversimplifying it? There'll always be a pot of money for branding, for nuanced sort of media planning and buying?
I hope so.
Otherwise, we're out of a job.
Yes,
basically.
yeah, absolutely. And why do they need us if there's one button that's going to solve everything? But also, I think it's true. I think the ecosystem has, or everyone in the ecosystem are different points in terms of sophistication. I think you're absolutely right, which is why I think test and learn is a good way for all of us to kind of develop in this space. I think we need to grow up as an industry and accept that there is nuance and we need to be thinking more in more multi-dimensional ways in terms of how we measure success. I don't think brands are going to go all the way to kind of direct response and I think at some point they will realize that, especially the brands that are in it for the long term, that that's never going to be enough to ensure brand longevity. And at the moment, we're just not comfortable, not only with kind of mixed methodologies or a tool set of outcomes or how do we measure creative next to delivery metrics. We're also not comfortable with multi-horizon measuring. We've sort of kind of abstracted everything back to what we can measure today. And yes, it's difficult to kind of measure something 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now. And so we've abstracted it all the way back to a click or whatever the metric is. But that's not enough. We need to actually have a dashboard that has short-term, medium-term, and long-term metrics in play all the time. We need to be comfortable with, yes, kind of in-flight measurement so that we can optimize on the fly, but we need to be able to then figure out how we do that over time. So you've got longitudinal kind of success, building on success longitudinally as well. We're just not comfortable with that. I think we need to start challenging ourselves on that.
Well, Vinny, you're a programmatic at the heart, like, so do you...
Oh, we do lots of channels. We do them all.
But how do you feel about that one?
Remind me of the question.
Sorry?
What are we talking about?
We were talking about the money left on the table and the big sort of walled gardens taking all the spoils. I mean, are we sort of surrendering our future to Silicon Valley?
It's really difficult because obviously they perform really well based on the metrics that we're all talking about. They look really good. I think, but what I'm seeing is that clients are desperate to spend their money elsewhere because of the volatility that can happen across these huge partners. And you see something changes and the whole market shifts, you know. So I think we're seeing clients actively try and test other things outside of these places. And I think that's what we're seeing even more so in the last 6 months is that desire to move funds. So yes, they take up the lion's share, but I think we're all aware that we'd feel much more comfortable if we could divide it out a bit more.
Alex, you want to
I was
chime
just
in?
going to say one last point, and something we haven't spoken about is independence. And the walled gardens in terms of measurement, I mean, I'm not saying what they're saying is incorrect, but I'll give you an example. So number of clicks, number of views, and it's like exactly what you said, Russ, you know, that definition of what is a view. You know, you go on Google, they'll say one thing on YouTube, go and look at LinkedIn, and they'll say 5 seconds on a feed is. But if you're looking at measurement and metrics and you're trying to target, let's say, DIY enthusiasts, and they come back and say, you have done the following, that's not a hard fact. That's an interpretation of what is a DIY enthusiast, and there is no transparency around what that is. So that whole thing around what they're doing, I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but there's a high level of subjectivity, and they are marking their own homework as
I mean, that's a whole different panel. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. But actually, on that point, you know, Meta, what a crap name. Meta basically are, you know, counting dormant accounts. They are delivering like video plays when it didn't happen. There is no oversight on this company. So I think you're right about the independence and the fact that a lot of the other channels are standing up and saying, we are, you know, we're the gatekeepers, you know, whether it's the UGC stuff or whether it's independent measurement or, you know, the agency point of view or even the publisher point of view. So I want to thank our panel. Tell you what, this is an unbelievably nuanced discussion. Like, and I have to say, like, it's almost you need a PhD sometimes to go into measurement because there's so much going on. Psychology, emotion, you know, outcomes, it all is blended in the pot. And to be honest with you, I think all of you guys are going to do pretty well in the new world. So thank you very much for your time. And a round of applause, please, for discussion. Thank you, Donald.